What would you say is the one thing that needs to change to eradicate all forms of violence against women and girls? What one thing needs to change?
More men involved, more men who have the courage and the strength and the self-confidence to join in these kind of conversations, to learn from women and from other men, and to stand with them as their partners and allies, and men at all levels, obviously youth workers, but leaders in the community and leaders in the business in the world, in the labor world, in schools, in education and sports. Men who have the courage and strength. Like I keep saying that, by the way, this is what it takes. It's courage and strength that's been missing on the part of men. By the way, women's leadership has been incredible, and women across the boards, in the sort of ethnic and racial spectrum globally, women have been at the forefront forever, and for decades and decades and centuries. And there have been a small number of men who have joined those women and who've been, part of the change, but not enough of us. I think, Neil, in answer to your question, we really do need to step up our game, those of us who are men. And by the way, the benefits are to women, of course, but also to men. I mean, there's so many men who have experienced diminished lives as a result of being traumatized by violence, by men's violence. Look at all the boys who have grown up in homes where their father's abusive behavior towards their mother and the kids have caused trauma that the boys have then acted out and taken out on others and themselves. Look at all the boys who turn inward, or young men or adult men who hurt themselves, who don't take care of themselves, in other words, by the way, suicide is violence turned inward. And in the States, we have a very big problem of suicide. I know you have your own problems, and we in Scotland and in Australia and elsewhere. But the point is, all of these are connected. And so anybody who's listening to this conversation today can't take away the idea that, men's pain or men's, violence that men experience and trauma is not, no one cares about that when we're focusing on men's violence against women. We Homo sapiens have a big enough brain. We can care about more than one thing at the same time. We can say that men's violence against women is horrible, and we need so much more from men to speak out about it and support victims and survivors and to change the culture that produces the perpetration in the first place. But we also can have compassion for men and men's experience of violence and sexual violence and abusive behavior that men experience as well as perpetrate, and that the culture is not doing well by men and young men either. So in short and in summary, to your important, sort of concluding question, I hope that this is just a spark for today's conversation for some men who are listening and others who I think need a bit of a push. We need more men engaged with this conversation. And I think there's just been too much silence in the world from men around this subject matter. It doesn't mean you have to get everything right, and it doesn't mean you have to be an expert, as I've said earlier, but it does mean you have to have the courage and strength to say, you know what, the status quo is not working. The level of sexual violence and domestic violence that we have in our societies is it's dysfunctional, it's abusive, and it's not acceptable. And what can I do to be part of the change? And what can I do to stand with these women who have the courage, the Lindas and the Vickies and the other women all over the world who have been pushing us for all these years? How can we finally step up and do the right thing? And one day, if we're successful, people will look back at the early 21st century, in the late 20th and the early 21st century, and say, wow, back then it was crazy how much sexual violence and domestic violence, but we've turned the corner, and it's clear that was like a function of an earlier era when there was really limited consciousness and accountability on the part of, in particularly on the part of men. But we've turned the corner, and we've made it so normal that having this conversation among men and hearing some things that I and others, Michael and others, have said won't be seen as, wow, that's cool, that's great, you have men talking about this. It'll be seen as completely normal, expected, and unremarkable. And that, guess what? That society will be a lot healthier, and there'll be a lot less abuse.